evening, everybody. I'm really pleased to be able to be part of the Cat Talks, keeping Anglicans talking. And I have a history of not having a problem doing that. So I would like to, though, talk about one of my passions, and that is about God's creation. And to be able to do that, I'd like to give you a bit of a backgrounder. I grew up, like many people, in a small rural community, an agricultural community, and it was that little village, or outside of that little village, where the church backed up to the river, and in the summer, there was a rope on the tree, and we would swing out behind the church and splash in the water and swim, and it was wonderful on those hot days. In the winter, we would skate up the river and we would skate into the village and join a hockey game, a pickup game, and have a great time then. We spent many days, as so many did, riding our bicycles on the back dirt roads, going past pastures, going past fields, and going past woodlots. And so God's creation was my playground as a child. I was enthralled by nature, and I loved it. As a matter of fact, this is a very good time to be talking to you because just the last couple of days, on October the 4th, a couple of days ago, we celebrated the life of somebody who was absolutely passionate about nature, and that was St. Francis of Assisi. I did the blessing of the animals, and we celebrated all of God's creation, and it's a wonderful thing to do at this time of the year when I can be driving into the city and see the changes in the colors of the leaves. And so, St. Francis is one of those people who's very much a hero of mine because of his passion for social justice, but also because he was the very first environmentalist, at least the first Christian environmentalist, that's for sure, about 1,000 years ago. What did I know about St. Francis a few years ago? Not a whole lot. I was introduced to St. Francis by my formation director when I was in theological school when we had our one-on-one in the end of the first term. And she asked me what I knew about St. Francis. Not much, I said. And she told me a little bit, and she said to me, I think you're a Franciscan by nature. And so with that, I had to run up to my residence room and find out more about this person, the person that would become my new best friend. And so there I was in theological school, studying and learning about things, learned about some incredible things, which was much better than my first encounter at university, I must say. So backing up in history a little bit again, my first year in university was rather a disaster. It lasted one term, and I was gone. But the one thing that happened was I excelled at geography. I excelled when it came to learning about this planet that we live on. And as a result of that, there were things that I learned. I learned about this new, or what I thought was a new threat to the planet called the greenhouse effect. In fact, I learned not too long ago that this sort of thing had been discussed in the 1800s. And then the person who actually coined the phrase, or coined the term, greenhouse effect, was Alexander Graham Bell about 100 years ago. 100 years ago, people knew about this. At least someone did. So when I was in conversation with my friend Carol a few days ago on the phone, she said, "What?" She said, "People knew about this 100 years ago, and it's taken this long to react?" I said, "Oh, come on, Carol, it's only been 100 years. It does take human beings a little longer than that, doesn't it?" But really, this is the time, this is the century when we are really responding to that. We're really responding to the greenhouse effect, and we're really responding to climate change. At a meeting this afternoon, I don't know how many times I heard that phrase and heard the concerns about this planet. Well, one of the things that happened to me back in theological school, moving ahead again, was that I was touched in a spiritual way. All of my life, I had been kind of moving along, very involved in justice, on the fringes of environmental issues, but not paying a whole lot of attention. And then it was hearing the story of Genesis. That was the turning point. It was hearing it from an instructor who expressed it in such a poetic way and brought me face to face with the God that every step of the way through creation said, "And this is good." And this is the kind of planet that God wants for us. And that was what it was. That's what it's all about, is being able to live in harmony with this planet and being able to find ways of understanding exactly how sacred this planet Earth is. So a few years ago, I was listening to a preacher, and that preacher was talking about the prayer book. And while she was talking about the prayer book, she said, because I've been influenced by so many people, she held a sea urchin in her hand, and she said, "O Lord, open our lips, and our mouth shall proclaim thy praise." She expressed with such passion the passion that we should feel when it comes to caring for God's creation. The passion and the joy and the awe and the mystery that we should feel when we are touched by this planet and know that we are touched by God. And never again will I ever be able to hear the words, "O Lord, open our lips, and our mouth shall show forth thy praise." Because God's creation can be contained in something as small as this and as something as large as the universe. But it's all about balance. It's all about holding nature as a sacred object in the palm of our hand and making decisions that don't just barter away and bargain away the resources, but see this planet as God's gift. And so there were times that I've been so surrounded by people, mostly people of faith, who are very passionate about this planet. When I talked about, in the past, the woman who was the preacher who held the sea urchin shell in her hand, when I talked about her passion, I also talked about the fact that I had read about unreasoned passion. Passion being unreasoned emotion. But I think that it's different than that. I think that there is, when it comes to caring for God's creation, to involving ourselves in a justice that will sustain this earth and leave it for future generations, and allow us to continue to feel that joy and mystery about it. Yes, this is a spiritual reflection, not an ecological reflection, and not a theological reflection. When we do that, then we're moved to respect this planet and respect all that's in it. When this planet becomes a sacrament, then we start to tread very lightly on the earth and on each other. And then God says it is good. And that's reasoned passion. That's reasoned emotion. That's the way that we can make a difference. That's the way that we can be interconnected, interdependent, and respectful of this planet and each other. Thank you very much.